What did you initially think about all of this?
I don't know if I had one particular thought, maybe a constellation of pieces of thoughts.
So actually, I was interviewed about this on Catholic radio in South Africa yesterday.
Um, thought thought bites, sort of.
I don't feel like I was clear at the very beginning.
And so I was thinking about friends, who I know pastor in congregations. What are they going to do? Yeah, so a lot of those kinds of things. I thought about, so I was returning from an alternative spring break trip. So I thought about, what do we do from here? Well, actually I was still away. So what are we supposed to do here? When we get back, which I already mentioned, or at least alluded to, my immediate family is still in New York City. So I was seeing that a lot of the toll already happening there. So I was like, do I go home? Do I stay here? What do we do? And I knew that I assumed that two of my family members will be essential workers, at least two. So I was thinking about them. I wondered, what this meant for our campus community, how all of us would have to find a new normal. Yeah.
What was going on, because I felt like the coverage was really skewed, like it was a China problem. I didn't feel like there was news coming out of our news sources that were like, this is something that could affect us. And it just felt like a problem over there in Wuhan, China. And then suddenly it started happening in other places and countries. And then it felt like it grabbed my attention, when suddenly it was in Italy and I think it was in somewhere in the Middle East, not Sudan. I don't remember. There was a Middle Eastern country and in Italy. And so I was like, oh, like those are geographically far away from each other. I was like, I don't remember which country it is, but I remember it was like not right near Italy. And I was like, wow, this is really spreading. So I feel like I went from being like totally disengaged and even like it's not going to affect us to like, wait a minute, this is mobile. This is moving very quickly. And then I was really alarmed at how much we were like, America, the leader of the free world. We have science, we have math, we have all sorts of incredible technology. I was in shock that it didn't feel to me like that we were having a coordinated response pretty early on, because I like to watch international news and I do like to know what's happening in the world. And it didn't seem like anything was happening here to protect us or to like take action, preventative action. I am now aware of how little was done and why we're all quarantined this many weeks into it, a month plus, for Chicago at least. I'm in shock. I'm in shock as an American, as a girl who had to learn how to write papers and prove my papers with facts and citations and like simple factual information. I'm in shock at the president's tweets. I'm in shock at like the propaganda. I'm like, how is this happening? How is this happening to us? It's 2020. We're America. So I guess I'm as guilty as other Americans of feeling like we're America. We have it all figured out. We fell asleep on this one and we're dealing with that reality.
That was the first thing that I thought when I read the very first report that stayed with me. It was about this physician in Wuhan that was trying to show the world that this had a very high. It was very virulent. It just multiplies very quickly and infects a very high rate of infection. And then subsequently, he acquired the disease, and he was a young man, and he died. And that stayed with me. And then from that on, I just read a lot. Bianca and Gianna know that sometimes I send them information, sometimes I don't, but I just try to be ahead of the curve. You know, I think what taught me is I try to learn and read without being alarming, but read the information very early so we can make decisions as early as possible. And that's something I apply in my work all the time. When it's just a way of thinking that when I speak with my patients, I spend a fair amount of time teaching them what to look for, what complications are, so at a very, very early stage they can identify it. It's easier to treat. Same thing now. That same way of thinking is to pay attention what's going on, what's coming up, who is learning more from this information, cases that have recovered, so we can learn very early what works and what doesn't work.
Yes.
Very clearly, exactly how I felt about it. I'm a retired military guy. I spent 28 years in the Army and retired after tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. And, and we prepare, the military, you prepare for the unexpected all the time and you train for it. And when I heard in February, for me, actually it was late January, when I heard about this pandemic in Wuhan, it gave me instant goosebumps. And at one of my assignments, I used to work with the biomedical preparation, that side of our government that prepares for these things to be able to respond. So I had a vocabulary and an understanding of what happens when a completely alien creature to the planet appears. Call it a virus. It doesn't know its new environment. And of course, we don't understand it. And so when aliens arrive, unexpected things will always happen. And behavior is impossible to predict. And so when I heard about what was going on in Wuhan and how they were shutting down, it gave me instant chills. I thought this could be it. A true pandemic like we hadn't seen before. And of course, when we started to hear how virulent that it is and how contagious it was, combined with the fact that it had about a 14-day incubation period, it just sent terror through me. Because if this thing was Ebola, it would be absolutely horrifying what would be happening in the world right now. Thankfully, it's not something that is so terrible as a hemorrhagic fever, something like Ebola. But when I saw it, when you combine sort of its contagion R factor and with its with the incubation period, that scared me. I was frankly surprised that first of all, I'm one of those people that thought China might have been more forthcoming, and I was a little bit surprised about how the world sort of took its time to respond to this, and that's probably more just because of my background than anything else. But initially, when this happened, yeah, I was paying very close attention to it. We had at the time when this all broke out, I had bands on the road in Asia. I had bands in Indonesia and Malaysia. I had artists touring in places that were themselves, these countries, these other societies that were learning, about the pandemic and the need to do social distancing and isolation. And our bands persevered through that period of uncertainty in those countries, did a really good job. But we were certainly concerned that they would, sort of, if they closed down the airports, then our artists would be trapped in that country. So it affected me sort of from a work perspective as well, because I had to very carefully manage that with our embassies. And the band members themselves some of them were actually terrified. They didn't understand. It's like, well, I need to go home. I need to go home right now. And it's like, well, we have a mission, right? And right now we're going to continue this. Here's how we do this. So anyway, we all experienced sort of that collective sense of community decision making in the face of such scary uncertainty, and we pulled through it. And then so subsequently, we ended up canceling all of our tours. Right, no more tours went out when the State Department declared the level 4 travel constraints global. So that sort of made it easy.
But my earliest memory, and I'd forgotten about this part of it, my earliest memory was reading an article sometime, I'm trying to think when it was. Yeah, I mean, I remember reading an article that, you know, the coronavirus had struck China, probably, I mean, that would have been December. But there was an article that said there was sort of something in the air, and I thought, okay, we'd heard about superbugs for many years, and I kind of just thought it was SARS and MERS. You know, my own grandmother, in 2018, I think it was, she had the swine flu, so the H1N1 virus, and that was the January, and she really never ever recovered. And so by December, she died at the age of 91. And so I was struck by, you know, this incidence of super viruses, and I just thought, okay, just another super virus. And then it was just before I finished off the fall term, and I was sitting in the lounge in our sitting room, reading the New York Times on a Sunday, and it was that story about the Wuhan doctor. It was an incredible piece of journalism, and I just remember sort of being gripped all the way through, and then learning at the end that he had died. Or no, I lied, because the initial article didn't tell us he had died. That came a few weeks later. But that article of the Wuhan doctor who was the whistleblower, and, you know, China kept everything very hush hush for a while, and he was really the one who wanted to call this out. And by that stage, we started to learn of the amassing deaths, and that was the first time really that I heard about it, and you know, thought little of it in terms of a global pandemic. I was enormously sad and saddened by the fact that so many people had died, and by the irresponsibility on the part of the Chinese government. But that said, I didn't think it would sort of touch here. And then I remember reading again in the New York Times when we had the first case in New York. And I suppose that's when it kind of hit home, and I was thinking, oh, wow, okay, it's pretty close now. But even still then, you know, there was all that terrible rhetoric about this being a flu, a big flu, right? This is just the next aggressive flu. More people actually die of the flu than they die of the novel coronavirus. So, and I found myself, I think, even posting that on Facebook once, you know, kind of saying more people actually die of the flu, or certainly saying it to friends. Maybe I didn't post it, but I certainly said it. And very quickly, that perception changed, right? As we saw the death toll rising, it was particularly a healthcare journalist at Columbia, who's on the faculty there, and he's probably one of the top healthcare reporters in the country, investigative reporters, Charles Ornstein. He started to post on his Twitter, and he wrote this article how it wasn't anything like the flu. And I just trust his opinion par excellence. And so when I saw that, I knew that this was something so much bigger, and that was frightening. And I started to get scared, you know, even before that, I should have said this, but even before that, especially in Italy, as the cases grew in Italy, that frightened me. In fact, the day before Milan went into lockdown, a member of my community here, a priest who was going to do PhD research, had flown to Milan. And so he arrived in Milan, and he's now locked down there. And we hadn't heard of it at that stage, pretty much. You know, the cases here were still very few, as far as I can recall. But it's all a bit of a blur, I think. You know, as the numbers started to climb, initially a couple of, you know, 10s and then 50s, and then before we know it, we're at 200, and then last week we were at 800, and we had 800 for a couple of days dying, and now it looks like it's sort of petering down a little more. So I think today is just over 400 deaths. But it's still absurd, that many deaths. It's difficult to contemplate. Fortunately, it hasn't affected anybody close to me just yet. But I we know that that's coming in some ways.